Hi, I'm David Edmonds of the BBC World Service, and this is The Big Idea. I've found the most fascinating ideas around and the people who thought them up, and I'm going to do my best to explain them. Babies are just blobs of skin and bone. They have no understanding of the world. Their minds are blank. Right? Nope. Very wrong. Today's big idea: children know a lot. Babies. Hopeless. I asked one baby what they thought of the universe, and this was their reaction. Babies and young children don't respond well to interrogations or cross-examination. There's not a lot of point presenting them with a multiple-choice questionnaire. So how do you get inside their minds? Alison Gopnik is one of the world's leading child psychologists.
So a big thing that happened was that we started developing techniques for actually getting the babies and young children to tell us what they know in their language instead of in our language. So we could do things like look at where babies looked, or we could look at what babies reached for. Or with slightly older children, we could give them a toy and see what decisions they made about how to make the toy work. Without actually asking them to tell us what was going on in their minds, we could get them to show us what was going on in their minds. And when we did that, and did that in a scientifically rigorous way, that's been the great scientific revolution, the results were sort of stunning and really changed our ideas about how human beings work in general.
There's fascinating medical and neuroscientific evidence that babies and young kids are actually far more intensely conscious than adults. Surprisingly, for operations, it takes relatively far more anaesthesia to knock out a baby than an adult.
So one thing that we know is that babies' brains are making many more connections. There's many more synapses than adult brains. And there's another lovely result that I like, which is that if you're an adult, as you're sitting here now, your brain is using up about 20% of your calories, which is a substantial amount. When you were 4 years old, your brain was using up 66% of your calories. So essentially, 4-year-olds are kind of like a Doctor Who villain. They're these giant brains on these tiny little bodies that are going around the world just hungrily trying to get more and more experience to feed their brains. I think that having a brain like that is likely to be a pretty intense experience.
Now it ends, Doctor! Now it ends!
In the sci-fi TV series Doctor Who, villains can be smart as well as evil. Babies learn faster than adults, but they seem to come into the world with a basic understanding of the laws of physics, that an object can move behind or around another object, for example. They're also fairly adept statisticians. Alison Gopnik found this out by using a machine, a little box, that lights up and plays music when certain objects are placed upon it. It's called a Blicket detector.
So what the baby sees is the experimenter take 2 blocks, a red one and a blue one, or a blue one and a red one, and put each block on the detector a certain number of times, and sometimes the detector lights up and sometimes it doesn't. So, for example, the experimenter might take the red block, put it on 3 times, and the toy lights up twice. Then she takes the blue block, she puts it on 6 times, and the toy lights up twice. So the interesting thing is the baby's actually seen the toy activate with the block twice in both cases. But if you were doing the math, if you were figuring out the probabilities, you'd say, oh, the red block is more likely to make the machine light up than the blue block. And that's exactly what 24-month-old babies do. Now, if you give them a choice and say, make the machine go, they choose the red block instead of the blue block.
That's pretty clever. What's more, babies seem to understand other people's desires and intentions much earlier than child psychologists used to believe.
One experiment that we did was to try and see whether children could figure out that someone else wanted something different from what they wanted. And again, how could you ask a child to tell you that? So what we did was we showed them 2 bowls of food, 1 bowl of raw broccoli, 1 bowl of crisps, All the babies like the crisps more than they like the raw broccoli. And then we showed them an experimenter who, on the contrary, acted as if she really liked the broccoli, went, broccoli, and really didn't like the crisps, said, oh, yuck, crisps. And then the experimenter would put out her hand and get the baby to give her something. And what we discovered was that very, very young children, toddlers, already would give her the crisps if she liked the crisps and the broccoli if she liked the broccoli.
So, highly conscious, rapid learners, an understanding of physics and probability and of other minds. Plus, young children develop a very early sense of something which resembles morality. They do nice things, and they seem to grasp who's worth interacting with.
Well, yet again, one of the myths about young children was that young children were amoral, that they didn't really develop a sense of morality, again, until quite late. And there's a whole batch of evidence that suggests that that's not true. So, for instance, even very young children are spontaneously altruistic. They'll work to try to help someone else to get what they want. And there's some evidence that even young children are sensitive to whether another person is being fair or helping. So, for instance, if they see a little puppet show where one puppet is helping another puppet to climb up a hill, for example, and the other puppet is hindering, they prefer to interact with the helpful puppet than the hindering puppet. And that suggests that they already have a sense of preference for other people's altruism.
Humans differ from other species in many ways, including the period in which the young rely on grown-ups. Human kids have an extremely long phase of dependence. One advantage of this is that they can spend more time playing and exercising their imagination. They can experiment. Professor Gopnik has called babies the R&D department of our species. Mostly, children learn from adults. But, says Alison Gopnik, adults have a lot to learn from kids. In fact, she says, some of the most high-tech companies on the US West Coast acknowledge that, which is why they sprinkle their offices with balls and beanbags.
I do think that in some circumstances, adults can benefit from having the same kind of thinking that we see with young children. And exactly in cases where you need innovation, where you need creativity, where you need to think, as they say, outside the box. And I think it's interesting that if you, say, look down near me in Silicon Valley, I think people there recognize that if you want innovation, you need to let people play the way that children play. You need to encourage a certain kind of childlike imagination. And scientists have, of course, said this for a long time.
So perhaps we should all learn to channel our inner child. And I'll have to stop thinking of babies as plain, bare canvases.
We've discovered that exactly the opposite is true, that even the youngest babies both know more and learn more than we ever would have thought was possible. It's really been this enormous revolution in the way that we think about babies and children, one that I think is long overdue.
Thanks a lot for listening to The Big Idea from the BBC World Service with me, David Edmonds. The producer is Ben Cooper. If you liked this episode, please leave a rating or comment if your podcast provider allows this. You can even let me know on social media about the big ideas you think I should be looking at. If you're a bit too young to do this, try to communicate any suggestions to your parents instead. Coming up in episode 8, how many friends can we have?